In a universe where some of the mightiest creatures to ever terrorize an ecosystem roam freely, what may be the greatest threat may so happen to be the ones roaming as a pack. Today on the channel, we break down the Anti-Meta Defense Project's latest assault on two of the strongest apex predators to ever dominate Jurassic World Alive, Beckesaurus and Beckeljara. For the first time in their reign of terror, both brothers are now put in a position they've never seen before. We'll be breaking down exactly what these nerfs mean moving forward, how the Deadliest partnership in the game has been affected, and perhaps most importantly, revealing Jurassic's newest big bad. Because just when you thought it was safe to traverse the valley, a new monster has arrived. Let's begin our analysis with the firstborn of the bunch, Beckeljara, a hybrid whose family lineage has become synonymous with destruction across multiple formats. Forged from one of the Beckel Spinax pairings seen in Camp Cretaceous, Blonde is heavily debated as the strongest epic in the game. His descendant, Becklejara, went on to become one of the most oppressive legendaries the format had seen since Rexy, requiring 3 separate nerfs before finally reaching a point where it could be reasonably contested. And even then, it still remains among the strongest creatures in its rarity. Then we arrive at Beckeljara. For nearly a year, this hybrid stood at the very top of the meta, armed with an incredibly versatile toolkit, elite stat distribution, and a matchup spread that bordered on unfair. Beckeljara became the benchmark by which every new hybrid was measured. We've covered this creature extensively in previous videos, but to give you the cliff notes, this thing was absurd. The most obvious changes came in the form of stat reductions, losing 200 health and 200 attack, bringing it down to 4,700 HP and 1,450 damage respectively. Alert Dodging Shriek also received a cooldown increase, preventing Beckeljara from cycling one of its strongest utility options as frequently as before. And defensively, the hybrid was also hit in departments where it needed most. Its speed decrease and vulnerability resistances were also reduced from 75% to 50%, while its affliction resistance was removed entirely. This gives opposing creatures far more opportunities to slow Beckeljara down and temporarily halt its momentum before it can recover with agile dominance. But most importantly, this creature's damage output is finally under control. Beckeljara is no longer a button-mashing machine capable of bulldozing its way through every interaction. Players now need to think more carefully about when to commit their damage and when to preserve resources for later turns. And the impact itself is already noticeable. Matchups that were once comfortable have now become significantly more sketchy and dangerous, and certain creatures such as Atremalistes can now secure victories that previously seemed impossible, albeit by the slimmest of margins. That said, this isn't a death sentence. Much like the nerfs that eventually hit Becklejara, the core identity of the hybrid remains intact. Most matchups stay relatively similar, but many of them have become far riskier and far less forgiving. At the end of the day, Beckeljara still does what Beckeljara does best. It just finally has to put some more work into it. This hybrid has made more than a few appearances on the channel, so we'll spare the lengthy history lesson. Beckesaurus was the undisputed king of the arena. Now, however, the crown has become considerably heavier. The hybrid received a 250 health reduction, lost 100 damage, and saw its speed decrease immunity cut in half. While those changes are certainly noticeable, the biggest adjustments came elsewhere. Defensive Counter-Strike, one of the defining abilities responsible for Beckesaurus' overwhelming matchup spread, lost its shield entirely. This single ability was a major reason why the hybrid could out-combo so much of the ladder to begin with, effectively invalidating a massive portion of the meta through sheer bulk. In its place came Darting Counter, and while losing defensive utility may initially sound devastating, which to a degree it is, the replacement is more offensive in nature. Beckesaurus now sacrifices some of its absurd survivability in exchange for even greater damage output during combat. The same philosophy also applies to its on-escape. Anger on-escape was originally introduced to discourage swaps, but in practice, the sheer amount of damage it allowed Beckeljara to generate often made swapping against the hybrid feel impossible, regardless of what creature you attempted to bring in. As a result, the ability was replaced with No Escape, a familiar tool inherited from its parent Brunette. Naturally, portions of the community were quick to declare the hybrid as gutted. To that, we'd like to present a brief history lesson in Meta Rebalancing 101. Beckelejara still comfortably occupies a position among the game's elite creatures. While the changes to its counterattack and on-escape appear significant on paper, it's important to remember what this hybrid was capable of before receiving many of its previous buffs. The reality is Beckesaurus still possesses tremendous offensive pressure, exceptional matchups, and enough raw damage to threaten virtually anything placed in front of it. If anything, these adjustments shifted the creature away from being an almost universally safe answer and back toward being a specialized offensive powerhouse and swapper. And somehow, the community seems completely desensitized by it. Its overall damage output remains remarkably high, especially with its critical damage left untouched, meaning many of its matchups have become slightly more crit dependent rather than outright worse. In other words, Beckesaurus is no longer the monster that invalidates 2/3 of the ladder. It's simply one of the strongest creatures in the game, which admittedly is still a pretty terrifying thing to be. However, with the brothers now on the back foot, what does this mean for the current meta? Over the last few days, we've seen a surprising number of players claim that these nerfs somehow killed the pair. We can confidently say, that's simply not true. Beckeljara and Becklerizaurus remain firmly within the top 10 creatures in Jurassic World Alive. The difference is that they now have actual competition. In fact, one of the biggest challenges our research team encountered while evaluating the post-nerf environment wasn't figuring out where the brothers belong, it was figuring out who belonged above them. For months, the top of the meta felt relatively straightforward. There was a clear hierarchy and a clear answer whenever somebody asked who the strongest creatures in the game were. Now, not so much. The gap between the top contenders has narrowed dramatically to the point where even our own team struggled to agree on who truly accompanies the number 1 and 2 placements. The debate ultimately came down to 2 creatures, Bariotor and Centralophus Lux. After a surprising amount of discussion and testing, we ended up giving the slightest edge to Bariotor. Not because Centralophus Lux is weaker, far from it. Rather, Bariotor tends to be the more reliable creature in combat. Central Lux derives a tremendous amount of its value from daze and matchup manipulation. It excels as a synergist, a disruptor, and one of the most punishing creatures in the game to swap against. However, much of its success revolves around leveraging those advantages correctly. Bariotor, meanwhile, is a little more straightforward. Whether functioning as a lead, revenge killer, or closer, the creature consistently generates value with very little setup required. While Flux can still cause problems and remain one of its most effective checks, Bariotor generally places enormous pressure on almost every matchup it enters. And ultimately, that reliability is what earned it the narrowest of victories. Perhaps one of the most encouraging outcomes of these changes isn't what happened at the top of the ladder either, but what happened beneath it. Creatures such as Compsovinator, Nominrex, and Atromalistes have all begun finding opportunities that simply didn't exist a few weeks ago. No, these creatures aren't suddenly launching themselves into the top 5 overnight, or even top 10, but they are finally able to compete in matchups that were previously far less forgiving. In fact, Atromalistes can now narrowly overcome Beckeljara, something that would have been extremely difficult before. And honestly, the fact that we're even discussing these creatures again says a lot about the current state of the game. For the first time in a very long time, the top 10 feels remarkably close together. Depending on team composition, matchup spreads, player preference, and even personal playstyle, you could reasonably argue for several different creatures occupying the top spots. And honestly, that's probably the healthiest Jurassic World Alive has been in quite some time. It's not far-fetched to assume that this game will inevitably house a new dominant duo or apex predator in the future. If there's anything these changes have proven, it's that dominance in Jurassic World Alive, no matter how long it lasts, is never permanent. Every creature eventually faces its own challenge, and every meta eventually evolves. That's not to say that every powerful creature deserves a nerf, but it does provide hope for the state of the game moving forward. Whether that's the economy, creature accessibility, progression systems, or overall game health, with the deadliest partnership the arena has ever seen finally relinquishing its grip on the ecosystem, we can once again hope for a future defined by greater wealth, stronger competition, and a healthier balance of power.